There's a silence many men carry that no one ever names. It's not the silence of peace, and it's certainly not the silence of rest. A different silence, the kind that forms after years of being unseen, unheard, unasked. If you know it, you don't need it explained. You've lived it inside. You showed up. You worked. You held things together. You kept the roof steady and the storms either at bay or contained. You swallowed what had no place to go, so others wouldn't have to carry it. You learned when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. Over time, dependable turned into predictable. Predictable turned into invisible. And somewhere along the way, a voice inside you grew quiet. Not because it had nothing to say, but because it had learned no one was listening. You were told to be strong, and strength became silence. You were told to man up, and that meant endure quietly. So you did. You carried the weight without ceremony, without relief, and without witness. And when men spoke of pain, it was treated as weakness. When men said they were tired, they were told to push through. When men said they were hurt, they were asked, well, what had they done wrong? What did they do to cause it? So the words, they simply stayed inside. At first, deliberately. Later, automatically. Silence hardened, not into peace, but into distance, into resignation, into a life that functioned, but no longer felt alive. Silence is never empty. It's full of things that had nowhere to land. The betrayals, some small, some big. The betrayals you never named. The grief that arrived too early or, in many cases, never left. The humiliations no one saw. Moments where systems moved on and you were expected to adapt. Relationships where your steadiness was mistaken for invulnerability. Children you loved but could no longer reach. You carried it all without applause, without comfort, and without being asked, hey, how are you doing? The quieter you became, the more the world assumed, oh, you were fine. Until no one asked any more. Even you stopped asking. Some men disappear into work, some into alcohol, some into isolation that feels safer than yet another loss. Different paths, same silence. You don't stop speaking because you had nothing left to say. You stopped because it no longer seemed to matter. But silence does not erase truth or pain. It only delays it. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when the weight you've carried changes its nature. Not into anger and not into blame, into clarity. You begin to remember what was set down way too early. The parts of yourself that learned restraint before they learned expression. You don't speak to be heard. You speak because silence is no longer required. Your silence never protected you. It only protected the world from having to see you bleed. And that arrangement, let's face it, it was never fair. Now, you may be older now, marked, weathered, living in a culture that no longer knows what masculine endurance costs. But you are still here, still breathing, still upright, and that matters. Now, you are not a relic. You are a living record, a man who endured what others never had to even name, a man whose sacrifices built stability for people who may never understand them. You survived losses that would have hollowed out others, and still, something intact remains. This is not the end of your story. It's the point where silence loosens its grip. This is still standing, a place for men who carried more than they were given credit for. Nothing is being asked of you here, only that you recognize yourself when you hear something true. And if this conversation matters to you, there will be more like it in time. We begin here, in this place, in this time, with the silence that shaped you and the man who endured it.